It's great to be with you, and for any of you who don't know us, we're Tim and Lynsey Johnston. We live and work in the south of Brazil, in the state of Minas Gerais. The last time we were here and were able to update you all was in January 2019, and back then life was normal, COVID-19 was unheard of, and we were based in Belo Horizonte. The greater Belo Horizonte area has a population which is roughly about the same as the whole of Ireland, between 6 and 7 million people.
But on our return to Brazil at the end of January last year, we decided it was time to move with all of our belongings closer to our main ministry, which is at Casa de Valentes de Davi, or translated the House of David's Braves or David's Mighty Men. This is a rehabilitation ministry for around 70 men suffering from varying degrees of addiction that we have been working closely with since the summer of 2018. Because the rehab house is situated about 45 minutes out of the main city of Belo Horizonte where we had been situated, and that was closer to 2 hours in rush hour traffic, it's in a small suburb town of Betim called Bandeirinhas, or Little Flags. Looking for somewhere more convenient to call home was our first priority.
You may remember the terrible news that hit the headlines just 2 days after we returned to Brazil. Unbelievable tragedy struck when a mining dam collapsed in a small town called Brumadinho in our state of Minas Gerais, and it killed around 270 people. It happened less than 8 miles from the rehab house and where we live now, and it sent huge shockwaves through the whole of our community.
We really felt the many prayers that went up for us and for the victims' families once the news broke. Some of our boys at the rehab lost loved ones and knew of many who had been killed or were unaccounted for. It really was a cruel reminder of the brevity of life and just how quickly and violently it can be snatched away.
Just a few days after this tragedy, the pastor that we work closely with, he found us this affordable and spacious home to rent, and it's just 6 minutes from the rehab, and that greatly cut down our travel, especially through the crazy Brazilian traffic. So literally for the first time since we left our home in Antrim to step out into full-time ministry 7 years ago, we no longer had to live in a room.
Or should we say, Lynsey no longer had to live in the corner of a room with Tim and all of his computer gear.
This complete change of scenery from the bustling city took a little bit of getting used to, and here you can see from our window the milkman is doing his rounds filling Coke bottles of fresh milk from the farm for our neighbour just across the road. And horses really are a regular sight here. And it's not uncommon to get stuck behind some of these quite regularly, especially on our way to church or the rehab.
Speaking of churches, way back in October 2016, we were both asked by a friend to attend an English service. It was in a place that seemed miles out of the city and took forever to get to, but we really didn't want to pass up an opportunity to hear God's word in our native tongue and to meet with Brazilians eager to learn English, so we readily agreed. Tim was then given an invitation to also share with the group in the following March.
Little did we realise then that we would return 3 years later to share again in this place, only this time it was just 10 minutes from our new home, and has since become our regular place of worship. We really are still thankful for this church family and fully appreciate all the ways in which they've shown us so much kindness and so much brotherly love as well. And that's especially true when they make time to celebrate our birthdays and special holidays, as we're so far away from our families and loved ones for so much of the time. We certainly had no idea way back in 2016 that God was introducing us to these wonderful people who would become pivotal in our future lives.
When we returned to Brazil from Northern Ireland, laden with generous gifts of support from various churches and supporters like yourselves, we were able to immediately get to work with quite a few different projects at the rehab. One of the first things we really wanted to do was to get the guys some new, comfortable seating for the meetings. As you can see, the chairs here were very badly worn out and broken. And although you can see from the picture that they were actually given a donation of some comfortable chairs, they really were not viable or up to task, so it really was not going to be possible to continue sitting in these for any length of time. So after some searching, we were able to purchase 80 brand new chairs, which were an immediate and much appreciated practical help for them. The men actually didn't want to use them at first and chained them up just for visitors. It took some time to persuade them that these simple plastic chairs were actually a gift from the people of Northern Ireland. and they were to start using them immediately for their own comfort and enjoyment, because they too have worth and dignity, not just the visitors. I'm pretty sure by their reaction this was something that they were not used to.
Another area that really needed urgent attention was the dormitories. The guys were squeezed in wherever there was a space to be had. And that included the upstairs hallway or even the floor if need be. And the toilets, they were even worse and in desperate need of repair and expansion. So a lean-to shed just beside the main building, which you can see here circled in red, it was commandeered as a site for the new dormitory. So with some financial support from here at home, we were able to help them purchase the necessary materials to start the construction. And this is one of the benefits of having a men's rehab centre. Many of the guys have various skills that we can use where possible to not only keep the costs down, but also to enable them and motivate them in creating a comfortable environment for themselves that they can be proud of. So when the new floor was laid and the new walls built, it quickly began to take shape. As you can see, the structure is very basic and it's not too dissimilar to how houses are typically built and look in Brazil. It really isn't anything fancy, but for them it's a huge improvement. The new toilet and shower facilities were also built, which made a big difference to the queues and the arguments between around 70 men that often ensued in the early mornings and in the late evenings as well. With the building work now complete, it just needed a lick of paint. And voila, a new dormitory with room for about 24 guys.
We also received a donation of wardrobes and cupboards from a local factory. And you can definitely see how it's starting to look a little bit more civilized now. We were also blessed to be able to purchase steel and mattresses with the help of a local church, and so the guys welded together these steel frame beds. This dormitory has been a great blessing in having the extra space with much better facilities for the guys. Because everyone must pay for water in Brazil, another huge blessing was the ability to finance a freshwater well right on the grounds of the house. Water is a very expensive commodity there, and you can imagine for 60 to 70 guys all using toilets and showers, etc. in the heat of summer, they get through a phenomenal amount of water. In fact, the pastor was spending almost a third of his full monthly support on water bills alone. So the well has been a huge success, able to produce between 8 to 12,000 litres of water per day, depending on whether it's the dry or rainy season, which is all stored in this huge tank.
We discovered about 40% of the water was actually disappearing from leaky pipes, and so it was necessary to repair this as soon as possible. And now with plenty of water, the next project we really had on our heart was to start a vegetable garden, using the abundant land surrounding the main house. It seemed like an impossible task at first because it had only been used as a dumping ground before, and the ground itself is a hard red clay that becomes almost like concrete when it dries. And never mind the piles of rubbish that needed to be cleared, it really was a mammoth task.
We actually discovered that the men had been burying a lot of organic waste from the kitchen over the years to prevent it from rotting in the heat, and after much persuasion they started to dig it up and sort it. They began sifting the soil one spadeful at a time in the punishing 35-degree heat. It was time-consuming and exhausting work, but as with all things in life, the better the preparation, the better the results, and this ground needed a lot of preparation. Some of the local farms also provided manure, which, as you can imagine with the hot sun, was baked hard and had to be broken up by hand. And all that organic material and manure then needed to be dug into the soil.
This process took time and it was difficult to keep them motivated, as the guys we work with always want to see the results instantaneously. But it's a process that develops patience and perseverance, which are essential characteristics for overcoming addictions.
Eventually we got the ridges made up and ready. You can see the soil was quite dark as we mixed in some of the ashes from the wood fire from the kitchen. Some of them thought that the dark soil was the good soil, but after it was pointed out to them, they began to realise that you could actually smell the difference. It's a bit like when you take compost mulch, there's a real earthy smell to it, whereas the ordinary soil normally has no smell.
Then the planting process started, and this is the bit where they were usually quite good, as they could actually see things happening, so they're much more enthusiastic at this stage. And after a good watering from the well, we were finally ready to see what would happen.
And it didn't take too long before we started to see the results. It really was amazing to see this once barren land start to come alive and actually bear fruit. I think this picture was taken after about 2 weeks planting. And after just about 4 weeks, already the first harvest was ready for eating. I don't know about you, but I don't think I've ever seen things grow as quickly as they do in Brazil. We actually ended up getting so much we couldn't use it fast enough. We were giving much of it away to the families who came to visit, and they were delighted with their fresh organic produce. The harvest certainly was more plentiful than the labourers were to even pick it or eat it.
We were then able to convince them to plant staggered rows so that not everything arrived at once, but was instead spread over a number of weeks or months.
Here you can see the tomatoes flourishing on the vine. They too grew very quickly and had a great flavour. And this all helped to really keep the kitchen stocked up and the food budget down. It was great that the plants grew so quickly, as it kept the guys busy and motivated in having to tend the garden, keeping the weeds down and watering the vegetables regularly, all as a welcomed and important part of their rehabilitation.
We also planted some papaya trees for fresh fruit, and we even planted pineapples too. But we had a real vision to keep going with the rest of the space that was available to us. So we planted one of their favourite veg, sweet corn, and it covered the side of the hill. They even filled the raised beds that had been abandoned in a small garden from earlier failed attempts. And it took no time at all for the ears to start to shoot up. God's provision and blessing really was becoming evident everywhere in this place.
They were able to eat homegrown corn for about 3 months, but I think they were nearly sick of the sight of it at the end of those 3 months. But they were so proud of what they'd achieved in growing it themselves. And it has been such a blessing for us to use the little knowledge and skills that we have to help them see the value of working hard in order to see things grow, not just physically, but spiritually as well, as we've been able to apply these principles and lessons in our studies from the Bible. The rehab also has a fresh, homegrown supply of meat. The average litter has been about 8 piglets every 10 months. And usually they're a good size at about 10 months old.
And here you can see one of the guys who's dressing a pig that's heading for the kitchen. Now you might have heard the expression, they use everything from the pig except the squeal. Can anybody work out what this is? I hope you aren't just after your dinner, and I'll give you a bit of a clue in the next slide. Is it any more obvious? Maybe this looks a bit more appetizing, but maybe not quite what you'd see in the shelves of Tesco's. So what do you think they do with all these bits and pieces? They make a thick bean stew with the pig meat and the skin, and they just love it. It's a traditional meal called feijoada, which dates back to their days of slavery, with slightly better ingredients these days, and what they love to serve at most special events and family gatherings. Not something we would expect to see on the table for Sunday dinner or for Christmas Day.
Another project we started was a chicken coop. The shed was prepared and 150 chicks were purchased on probably, unfortunately, the coldest day of the year. Sadly, we lost almost half of our purchase in the first few weeks, but the ones that survived began to thrive. Oddly, however, for over a year, they did not produce one egg between them. And even though it took a lot longer than expected, just before we left Brazil in May this year, a miraculous thing happened and the chickens started laying eggs. So we hope they can use them to grow their numbers. And here the men are constructing a large separate pen in order to expand the area for the next batch of chickens to be reared on site,
whilst also taking full advantage of the roosters in the kitchen. Our local church also gifted 2 goats to the project so they could eat the excess grass and vegetation around the property and also produce milk and cheese. And although they were a great asset to the project, and one even gave birth to a kid on site, they were unfortunately left outside by mistake one evening late last year, and all 3 were killed by a wild animal. The hope is to replace them on our return to Brazil and restart this part of the project, all being well at the end of the year.
We were a bit saddened to see the state of their homemade gym, which was a place many of the men frequented to try and release some of their frustrations, whilst also trying to keep themselves healthy physically as well as mentally. You can maybe see the weights there that are made from tin cans filled with concrete attached to a metal pole. So we invested in some gym equipment, including a punching bag and weighted skipping rope that even Jonathan, who only has one leg and one eye, is enjoying. We also got them a power rope, which has been very well received and well used, even in the scorching heat.
We were also gifted money for a pool pump and cleaning equipment so they could keep down the cost of having to pay someone to clean the pool, and to aid their motivation in keeping it clean in order to enjoy a much needed dip in the heat of summer, and they really do enjoy the swimming pool.
Family is a very important part of life for all of us, but it's even more so for a recovering addict. Often they have lied to, stolen from, been abusive to, and even hurt those closest to them over many, many years.
So our desire has been to bring them together as often as we possibly can, so they not only can spend some valuable time with their loved ones, but that their families can also see their progress and transformation firsthand. One of the biggest projects we undertook as a couple in the last year was to prepare Christmas dinner for all 70 guys and their families. We sat for over 8 hours, well into the wee small hours, peeling and grating tons of carrots, peeling and dicing onions till the tears were no more, and preparing about 30 kilos of chicken along with all the trimmings and dessert.
We also did up some treat bags with sweets for the men and their families, with a Christmas message and verse in each one of them. This was the only gift that most of them would receive this year. And after a couple of hours sleep at 7:30 a.m, we packed the car up with all the food and headed to the rehab for a full day of fun, fellowship and festivities.
And after a few hours of cooking a very large pot of chicken on the simple stove, we were able to serve a very popular Brazilian Christmas dinner of stroganoff with rice and potato chips, and it just went down a real treat.
Of course, everybody wanted seconds with Tim's good cooking, and we were thrilled to see them enjoy the unique opportunity to just spend time together on this special day. Essentially, we were trying to show them what a normal Christmas day in a Brazilian family's life might look like. We had a full programme of fun, beginning with some games of Uno while we waited for lunch. We then made some popcorn and watched the Nativity story to remind them of why Christmas is even celebrated at all. In the evening, we gave out the little treat bags of sweets and a packet of biscuits each, and they were just so grateful. You'd have thought they had been given the best gift ever.
We played some simple party games just so that they could laugh together for just one day, work in teams and learn to encourage each other to succeed in a competitive environment. I don't think I'd ever seen any of them laugh so much or enjoy themselves as much as they did that day. Many came to us at the end with tears in their eyes, saying that they had often dreaded Christmas Day as they were just alone, usually on the streets and so far away from their families. But this literally had been the best Christmas some of them had ever had in their lives. Such simple gestures had a profound impact on them and us, and we were just thrilled to see them forget about their problems for a little time and just to enjoy the gift of life that they've been given.
Take a look at the smile on Luciano's face. We will tell you more about his story shortly. It was so humbling for us to see the despair and hopelessness that had been in their eyes for so long being replaced with pure childlike joy. It is our purpose and vision for being with these broken souls in order to point them to the one who can truly transform their despair into this kind of joy for eternity. And the best way that we can really do that is to teach the Firm Foundations course. As many of you will be aware, we have been doing since February 2019. We try to teach the main points of the Bible from Genesis all the way to Jesus as practically and visually as we can. And the guys have really responded so well to it, often with tears in their eyes. They often approach us at the end of the meetings and tell us they've never heard the Bible explained so simply and so practically. And we've often had very encouraging conversations over a bite to eat after the meetings and even the next day. We had been doing these lessons weekly up until the lockdown in mid-March, and we only had 6 lessons left to teach until we would arrive at Jesus' death and resurrection. Although we never got to the end of the teaching, we did arrive at the beginning of Jesus' ministry with the story of his baptism and temptations, and we were due to start teaching about his miracles when everything stopped. So we're really happy that the men had enough of a foundation from the Old Testament to continue reading for themselves.
By the time we left, the men had already been well encouraged to do their own study of the Bible, and so they began having discipleship classes to support each other in understanding more about what they had been taught. It was very important for us to teach them that these weren't just ideas that we were showing them, but it was God's word, it was his story, and it was essential for them to learn to read it for themselves in order to apply it to their own lives. And these 3 guys were in the middle of a Bible study when we arrived one evening, and it was just thrilling to watch them discussing the stories we'd been sharing the night before.
Our ultimate desire is to see these broken men walking with the Lord and sharing these truths, not only with each other, but back home in their own families and communities. After all, they are much better equipped than we are with the language and the culture. It does help that we have a captive audience, but even this can be challenging at times, especially on this particular night when Tim was chatting away at the front and I could see the weather was getting worse and worse, and it was starting to get quite wet and cold and pretty miserable where we were sitting. And because we're open to the elements, I think it's safe to say that everyone ended up completely soaked.
We've seen some crazy storms out there in Brazil, and this one hit just as we finished visiting on the streets, and you can hear the hailstones hopping off the roof from the chunks of ice that have been known to dent and break windscreens as well. And this is the aftermath, with many of the roads blocked, including this one, which is the main road into the rehab. The rainstorms were particularly bad this year, with some major flooding. The bridge on the main road to the house was washed away, so we couldn't reach it easily for several weeks, and this hampered our visits and our teaching. And the other road out of our community was no better, and this caused us some problems for several weeks.
Actually, some houses on our street suffered with a bit of the flooding. And of course the boys were drafted in with the cleanup operation. Although it wasn't just so bad for us, we did have to deal with some severe leakages from our roof during every heavy rainstorm, and we eventually got this resolved just 3 days before lockdown started.
Of course, with the heavy rain comes the problem of power cuts at the rehab, as Nathan found out one night. He was in the middle of getting his hair cut. And this was the very trendy and fashionable result. As the rehab is a good bit out of the city and the sun is always down by 6 p.m, the place was cast into utter darkness, quite literally. So I had to go to work with some innovative ideas using some basic materials I could find in order to create some oil lamps that could sustain them until something more suitable could be purchased. Although this looks very romantic, it was anything but. Thankfully, we could purchase some drums of drinking water as the well pumps had stopped working, and they were able to cook a basic meal with using the gas and the makeshift lamps just for light.
Of course, speaking about storms and trials, many of you will remember and have been asking about Wallace. He's the guy in the red t-shirt to the left of the picture, although one of the most respectful and timid of the group of men in the house. It was after some of the teaching on the consequences of sin one evening that Wallace felt very convicted about his past and wanted to put things right. He and a friend were involved in the killing of a local drug trafficker 18 months before, and although he essentially had gotten away with it, after much prayer and wrestling with the burden of what he'd done, he decided to hand himself in to the police and deal with the guilt and anguish it had caused him. This was a hugely difficult decision and caused us all a great deal of distress. But on the 22nd of May 2019, Wallace gave up his freedom by voluntarily walking into the police station with his lawyer, and he has been held in a remand centre ever since. Due to the interruption of the pandemic for all judicial hearings, he is still waiting to be seen by a judge. We were very concerned for him due to his timid nature and the reputation of Brazilian prisons, so we did try for quite some time to get more information on how to visit him, but all to no avail. Eventually, in February this year, we did get the opportunity to accompany his family to go and get the necessary visitors cards in order to see him, as only his father had been to visit in the 9 months since he'd handed himself in.
We took a long time to get all the paperwork sorted at the necessary office, and it wasn't an easy task. But when we finally were let through with enough documentation to get to the reception desk, we were asked how we knew Wallace. And when we told them it was through the rehab and it would be a pastoral visit, they said, "Oh no, you don't need a card. Just turn up at the remand centre and they'll just let you in." So after we helped Wallace's mum and brother to get their visitors cards, we headed over to the prison, which to our surprise was just 10 minutes from our home. And we arrived full of hope and excitement to see him again after months of waiting and months of praying. Now, we've been to a few prisons in Brazil, and one thing is for sure, they are all different. This close-up photo of the prison entrance is from the internet, as we're not allowed to take photos, but they will give you a good idea of what it's like. And here you can see the families, they're queued up outside with food and other necessities, as the prisoners actually depend on these parcels for their necessary and basic toiletries or treats that aren't provided by the centre. And the families often travel very long distances for many hours at a time, but can only actually see their loved ones once a week. So we went up to the big iron door and asked to be let in, and after some initial misunderstandings and reservations, eventually we were let in through the main door to speak to the guards at the reception. We told them we were missionaries from Northern Ireland and we were there for a pastoral visit. They looked rather confused at our lack of documentation and actually told us we needed to fill in a rather lengthy form and go through a whole process, including needing permission from a local church. And we were just about ready to give up and make a hasty retreat when one of the guards rang through to a lady who is a social worker inside the prison, and we were told to wait for her to come and speak to us. So we waited for about 45 minutes and eventually a very bubbly, friendly lady arrived at the reception, and after explaining who we were and why we were there, she said, "Oh, come with me." So off we marched into the prison.
We were then shown in past the guards and security into the office of the Director of Police, where we were introduced as missionaries from Northern Ireland. Although he was very intimidating in his full military gear, to our relief he smiled when we told him a bit more of our story, as he said he knew some people we'd worked on the streets of Bella with. He then extended a hand of friendship and said we were very welcome any time we wanted to visit. God certainly undertook in that situation.
Next we were brought into another office to meet the overall director of the prison, and here's a photo I found on the internet. But picture this guy in the light blue shirt, sitting in his high leathered chair, wearing a thick gold chain, smoking a cigar with his feet on the desk, and he looked more like a drug lord than the director of the prison. Again we explained ourselves and he said, "Oh yes, anytime you want to come to visit, and anything you want to do here, you just let me know and we'll try to help you in whatever way we can." And amazingly, once again, God undertook in such unexpected ways.
Then Rosie, the social worker, our guide, and also the activities coordinator, brought us into a room to show us the work that she is doing with the prisoners. She actually does an amazing work of teaching men how to make things out of origami paper as a way to keep them occupied and help them in the rehabilitation. She too offered us the invitation to teach the Firm Foundations course in the prison and said she would like to help arrange for us to come in at least once a month to speak to all the guys. As the director had given us permission to go and visit Wallace, bearing in mind that we had just had a tour of the prison and had still not even shown any ID, the alarm suddenly went off as a fight broke out in the yard over a football. The riot squad was called in and we were quickly ushered out. We missed our chance to see him by no more than a whisker. The devil was certainly at work. We have been back a couple of times and have met many boys within the prison, but COVID-19 has prevented any more access from mid-March, and so we never did get to see Wallace. We are, however, praising God that his family, especially his dear mother, who doesn't keep so well, did get to see him, and they were able to communicate to him how much we had tried to visit. Not only did we help enable a family to get more access to their son, but we were also given the green light to potentially start a new ministry there, which we will hope to pursue as soon as possible on our return to Brazil.
The greatest encouragement for us is that it wasn't just Wallace who made a real profession of faith. We saw a number of guys transformed over the months with a real desire to be baptized as well. Days like this just bring us so much joy, but it isn't always like this, unfortunately. Remember this guy, Luciano, from the Christmas party? Well, here he is at his baptism ceremony last year. He was married with 3 small children and had been in the house a number of months before making a firm profession of faith. And here he is, getting baptized after publicly declaring his faith in Christ on the 16th of May 2019. However, on the 25th of April 2020, less than a year later, he was stabbed to death on the street. We don't know the circumstances of his death, as often people are stabbed for many reasons, including being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But we were devastated by his violent and untimely death. Another one of our boys, Paolo, died in July this year after getting into a fight over a kite, of all things, and being under the influence of drugs. He fell and he hit his head. Although he sat under our teachings many times, he left the house without completing his treatment, and we don't know where he stood spiritually. He was just 21. And stories like this have a huge impact on us, as each individual is a life that we cherish and love dearly.
But for every tragedy, there are also many victories and causes for rejoicing, because on the same day that Luciano was baptized, so was another guy, circled at the back here, named Hooderson. He too was baptized on the 16th of May 2019, and he not only completed his rehabilitation at the end of the year, but he got married in January this year. He joined a local church and is still going on well with the Lord. Here he is on the right, back visiting the house earlier this year on one of the visitors' days. And although we lost Paolo, this is him on the right in the picture, his closest friend in the rehab, Lucas, circled here on the left. He completed his rehabilitation. He returned to his family more than 6 months ago. He's working full time and is going on strong with the Lord. He's a huge football fan and keeps in regular contact with me, especially whenever he hears that Liverpool are playing, and he was more than pleased when we won the Premier League this year.
Here are 2 more success stories from the house, Victor and Luciano, who completed their rehabilitation and got a job working for stonemasons. And Luciano returns regularly to check in on some of the boys at the rehab. And he was just overjoyed to be reunited with his beautiful family earlier this year. Victor was actually one of the first people I met on the first day I ever went to the rehab. And I took this picture with him back in July 2018. Although he had left a short time later, and Lindsay didn't get to meet him, she did get an opportunity when he returned to the rehab in early 2019. And we both got to see him complete his rehabilitation and get into full-time employment, which was a wonderful encouragement to us both. And here he is with his wife and his new baby daughter just a few months ago, enjoying a second chance at life after addiction.
This is Janelson, pictured after completing his treatment at a Christian Impact event in his local community. And here's Wellington back with his beautiful young family post-treatment. And at his wedding earlier this year, where he made his sacred vows to his young fiancée.
Then there's Anderson and Flavio and Salo and Joaquin, and the list goes on. To see them not only completing their treatment, but being reunited with their families has been nothing short of miraculous. This is Hobson with his beloved princess. This is Valmir, who has battled many suicidal thoughts and feelings of despair, being reunited with his children, who he thought wanted nothing to do with him after the many years of pain he has caused them and their mother because of his cocaine addiction.
But maybe our favourite story so far of a family reunited against all the odds would be that of Demosthenes Jumonji, pictured here on the left. He had achieved great status and some considerable fame as a world-class champion skateboarder, which earned him a lot of respect among his peers. Unfortunately, this world also brought with it a lot of temptation with drink, drugs and a party lifestyle, so he was quickly addicted to cocaine, and it robbed him of more than 30 years of his life. Although he travelled all over the world, being half Brazilian, half Japanese, by the time we came into contact with him, he'd fathered 7 children, married 3 times, he'd been in various rehabs no less than 14 times, he was missing his entire top row of teeth and was gaunt and hopeless. He as much as said, "It's nice to meet you, but I won't be sticking around." But God had other plans.
One particular night, Linz was doing the talk and used a simple video to demonstrate the devastating power of sin and addiction, when you just can't resist a marshmallow for 2 minutes. Although a useful visual reminder, she had no idea of the impact this video would have on Demosthenes that very evening. He came over to her the next day, saying he'd been up all night thinking about that video. He despaired having to give up his passion for skating, but he knew that he had no resistance to the drug culture that went hand in hand with the sport. But he asked if we would take him to the skate park for the first time in 6 years, to see if he could rekindle his passion, and always keeping in mind the video of those children any time that he felt tempted to return to the drugs. He immediately zoomed around the skate park like the pro he had always been, and that burden was lifted off him. It was really visible on his grin as he completed this complicated maneuver. Even his beloved dog Manga Rosa wore a cross around her neck as a testimony of what God had done in his life. He got his teeth fixed and sorted out, his passion was awakening, and he declared that with God's help he would continue doing what he loved. But this time he would tell everyone that he had met Jesus and had been freed from his addictions.
And that's exactly what he did. He took every opportunity given to him to share his story. He attended his first competition, drug-free, and his category was very competitive, but he placed 3rd, having trained for 2 sessions before the main event. And he gave all the glory to God to anyone that approached him. It was really an amazing thing to witness.
When he finally completed his time at the rehab, he immediately wanted to return home and reconnect with his 3rd wife, who lived in Sao Paulo, in the south of Brazil. He was reunited with his parents and started to attend church regularly. And these photos of him looking healthy, happy and surrounded by his family and children were the absolute highlight of our time and work here. We were devastated then to hear on the 9th of July this year that he had passed away from a heart attack. But he knew himself that his years of drug abuse had taken their toll on his body. And with diabetes and the strong threat of COVID-19 in the south of Brazil especially, we were already concerned for his health.
Bom dia, meu nome é Demóstenes Monge, tenho 46 anos, 30 anos de adicção ativa, 14 de internação e nesse pequeno vídeo o que eu tenho para falar é que com a experiência própria que todas as coisas que acabam em vício começam pelas pequenas coisas, né? É um pequeno gole de cerveja, um pequeno trago de cigarro, um pequeno tiro de cocaína. E aquilo no começo é uma maravilha, parece que não vai te criar dano nenhum, mas paulatinamente nós vamos vendo que até mesmo o próprio Renato Russo disse que de paz ela só é branca, né? E que parece cocaína, mas é só tristeza. Eu cheguei no fundo do poço, perdi tudo, perdi a minha família, 3 casamentos, 7 filhos, tudo por causa da dependência química. Perdi a faculdade da razão e só não fui morar na rua porque eu ainda tenho uma mãe muito sofrida, que me ama muito. Hoje, para a glória de Deus, eu me encontro limpo, indo para 7 meses, estou aqui numa base missionária, um centro teológico de formação cristã chamado Valente de Davi, retornando para minha terra natal, que é São Paulo, e só não consegue quem para de tentar. Eu deixo uma dica para você que está aí fumando baseadinho, dando um tirinho só de sexta-feira, cuidado. O diabo ele anda ao derredor bramando como um leão, procurando a quem possa estragar. Corte agora, procure uma igreja evangélica mais próxima da sua casa. Procure entregar os teus caminhos ao Senhor. Caminha com Deus, porque estamos vivendo tempos difíceis, a qual a vinda de Jesus está muito próxima. E eu quero agradecer todos vocês que me ouviram agora. Eu deixo esse alerta, uma pessoa de 46 anos que usou droga há 30 anos. Saia desse caminho enquanto é tempo. Corra para os braços do Pai. Isso daí não é alegria, isso daí é euforia. Alegria nós só encontramos na pessoa bendita de Jesus. Amém. Um bom dia para vocês.
Although he barely lived for one more year after truly getting his life back on track, we are so thankful to have known him in this life and to have been able to pass on his story and his legacy to everyone we meet, that God truly does transform barren and broken lives that have been pushed to the brink of despair. It only takes one moment with the Lord to completely change someone's destiny. We would also like to update you all on a few other stories from some of the men we were working with the last time we shared with you all. You'll maybe remember Wanderson, aka the Chicken Man, who was cutting up a chicken in the video that we showed of the rehab kitchen. And this was the nickname that many had given him so they could remember to pray for him. We are so pleased to say that he is going on tremendously with the Lord, and as you can see in this photo, he's in full-time employment. He sends me verses on a daily basis and is always keeping in touch. He actually sent this photo earlier this week of him with his family. Pictures like this from those in the grip of addiction are almost unheard of, but his is a life that has been truly restored and transformed through God's wonderful saving grace.
You'll maybe remember Raphael too, who gave a short video testimony the last time of what God was doing in his life. I visited him at his parents' house, and again he too is doing very well. He's had a steady job for about a year now and is hoping to get married to his fiancée soon. Many will also remember Jairo in the middle of the picture, who also had a video testimony. He shared back then that he had never sat around the table and had lunch with his family in over 25 years. And yet here he is with his children enjoying some family time together recently. We went to visit him at his church and he is going on really well with the Lord. And he is involved in several ministries, including ministering around the streets of Bellow. And he also has a ministry of sharing God's word via radio into the local community.
And here we are with him and his church family, where just 18 months before he'd been sleeping on the street outside. He told us he's very keen to give the young people of his community a good biblical foundation, and so is eagerly awaiting for us to finish the Firm Foundations material so that he can start teaching it in church youth groups of his community. He also gave an update on how things are going.
Meu nome é Jairo, é um prazer estar aqui de novo na casa. Quando eu saí daqui da casa, eu tinha de enfrentar o mundo lá fora. E graças a Deus, através daquilo que eu aprendi aqui, eu chego lá fora, volto aos seios da minha família, restaurado, mudado, mas Deus tinha algo a mais para mim. Que eu sou carente e dependente de Cristo, que eu preciso cada vez mais chegar diante de Deus, porque a partir da hora que eu colocar na minha mente que eu sou, que eu faço, que eu deixo de fazer, a minha queda é certa. Então me ensinaram aqui dentro da casa que o meu eu é Cristo, que o que eu tenho de fazer é me lançar aos braços do Senhor. É oração, é jejum, é palavra. Eu tenho uma célula todas terça-feira que eu reúno as pessoas para falarmos de Cristo. O Senhor me concedeu a graça. Eu ajudo no ministério da igreja como evangelista. Uma pessoa que há um ano e pouco atrás era um dependente químico. Hoje as pessoas me chamam para me aconselhar os filhos deles sobre droga. Hoje as pessoas me chamam para me falar com a esposa, a mulher me chama para me falar com o esposo dela sobre Cristo. Hoje o Senhor me dá condições de levar a palavra de vida. Hoje o Senhor me dá condições de trabalhar com dependentes químicos, enviar para aqui, para casa valente de Davi. Deus me trata, me tira das drogas. Deus restaura a minha família. Eu com 2 filhos envolvidos no tráfico de droga. no Alto Veracruz, onde com índios é muito forte, criminalidade, essas coisas, o Senhor me concede a benção, através do meu testemunho, tirar meus filhos dos tráficos. Meus filhos hoje não tá na criminalidade. Meu filho entrou no tráfico com 14 anos, muita cadeia, e sai aquilo, polícia metendo o pé na porta, invadindo a casa. Hoje, se eu chego, todas as vezes que eu venho da igreja, eu passo lá na casa para ver se meus filhos estão lá. Meus filhos estão dentro de casa. Tudo isto eu aprendi a exercitar a fé. Aprendi a exercitar a palavra de Deus aqui. Hoje eu sou um testemunho vivo. E digo às pessoas, aos que vai ouvir, vai assistir esse vídeo, esse depoimento. Se você tem na sua família algum dependente químico, alcoólatra, e muitas vezes, muitos vêm falar que não tem jeito mais, e você quer abandonar, não abandone. Não abandone. Exercite a fé. Eu sou um milagre. Eu sou um milagre. Meu nome é Jairo Luiz. Eu sou um milagre. E eu quero dizer a você, esse milagre não encerra em mim. O dono do milagre, o qual é Cristo Jesus, o Senhor vai fazer o que fez na minha vida. O Senhor vai fazer na vida do seu também. Em nome de Jesus.
The two guys in the middle of this picture with the beards are Himon to the left and Ricardo to the right. They were two of our guys from the rehab who were doing so well with their treatment that we decided to take them with us to our street ministry to Crackalangia. We were so amazed at how God used them both to minister to people in the midst of their despair, that Christ really is the answer, because they were a living testimony of his saving grace.
There are no shortage of opportunities to speak to people, either day or night, and we just come out of church one Sunday when this man approached us asking for money for a bus fare. Of course he was an alcoholic and only wanted to feed his habit. Even after speaking to him about his hopelessness and offering to help and assist him in getting back on his feet, with a literal open door to take him straight to the rehab, the pull of the addiction was just too great, and sadly he declined. We never did see him again, but we pray that more chances like that come his way, and maybe one day he will accept the open invitation. Another wonderful yet unexpected invitation to reach out into our local community came by way of the creation of an English class. Lynsey had an idea that we could start teaching English once a week in our local church, really with the aim of creating more opportunities for friendship and fellowship within the group of about 9 regular attendees to our English Sunday school. However, word soon got around, and Lynsey soon had upwards of 19 people attending weekly, until COVID-19 put an end to all that. The incredible answer to prayer that this little class brought us certainly came in a very unexpected way.
This is a picture literally taken from the gates of the church that we attend. We're looking across the street to an area that is very openly used by a few homeless people under the main bridge. This might be a better view of it, and as we don't like taking pictures or exploiting the people, these are taken from Google Maps, but they do give an excellent view of their houses, so to speak, and how simply but publicly they live. The church family had expressed many times to us a desire to create a ministry and form friendships there, but they'd never had the courage to do so. So we really prayed about a good opportunity to approach this area in God's good timing, and when it was obviously safe to do so. It was actually after the church carol service, just the weekend before Christmas, when we had returned to our car late that evening, that we were met by a lady and her son. After a very brief conversation, she openly told us everything about her life and how she came to be living on the streets. Her husband had put her out of the house, and her 2 teenage children wouldn't leave her side, so all 3 were living right in the area we had been praying about, right across the street, and the door was now opened. Our first opportunity to bridge the gap between the church and the street presented itself in the form of a birthday celebration that we had held for those in our English class in our last free week that we enjoyed before lockdown. Because there'd been so much food left over, we suggested that they could take it to the people living under the bridge, and so the divide was essentially bridged and the gap was closed in a very simple but humanitarian way. On reflection, we are so thankful this happened just before lockdown, because our return to Northern Ireland was quickly brought forward to a much earlier date than we had anticipated. So we are so grateful that the church family is now on hand to reach out into this area with food and support in our absence. God is so good, and his ways are always perfect. Even in the midst of so much turmoil, he made sure a way was created for these people under the bridge to have a connection to the church just in time.
So now that brings us to why we're at home and when we hope to return to Brazil. We originally planned to return to Northern Ireland in early July, after Lynsey's parents spent 3 weeks with us seeing the work. But unfortunately, due to COVID and flight restrictions, all this was cancelled, and things in Brazil became increasingly more difficult and dangerous for us to remain there. We essentially left when we did, as we thought we might get trapped in the country, as many countries began closing their borders and the airports were closing fast. And by the time we did leave at the end of May, only Sao Paulo was still open with one flight a day into Amsterdam. The next week, both Europe and the USA closed their borders to anyone travelling from Brazil, although we're still not sure if this included UK citizens.
Our travel insurance expired mid-July, and as yet the Foreign Office have not given the green light for us to renew any insurance to return to Brazil safely. Although we had a flight booked back for the 1st of November, the first leg of this journey was cancelled, and so it's unlikely we'll be able to return until at least the end of the year. This is a difficult and frustrating turn of events, but it is an unavoidable and worldwide pandemic, so we are so thankful for the support and understanding of those who are behind us as to why it is all but impossible for us to return at the present moment. We are taking advantage of this time at home to resolve many issues with paperwork and other things that we have put off until now, and we're able to keep up with many medical appointments and checkups when it's possible due to the backlog of demand with the pandemic. Please continue to pray for the people of Brazil, and that even in our absence they will continue to put into practice all that we have taught them, and they will be held by the power of our Heavenly Father, who we are assured loves them all more than we do. Thank you all for listening, and God bless.
When my eyes cannot see, I will trust you in the valley. I won't fear anything, for your presence, it surrounds me. You are the one who lifts me up when I am weak. You are strong, you're faithful. You're faithful. You are the one who brings me hope. Your love will never let me go. You're faithful. You're faithful. In the darkest hour, in the middle of the raging sea, when I'm in the battle, Lord, you are with me. Your light is shining. You make the darkness flee. You are my rescue. Lord, you are with me. Oh, 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 oh. In the desert, in the flood, Lord, your promise is enough for me. You are gracious, you are good, never failing. God, your love endures. You are the one who lifts me up when I'm weak. You are strong, you're faithful. You're faithful. You are the one who brings me hope. Your love will never let me go. You're faithful. You're faithful. In the darkest hour, in the middle of the raging sea, when I'm in the battle, Lord, you are with me. Your light is shining. You make the darkness flee. You are my rescue. Lord, you are with me. Oh, 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 oh. Lord, you are with me. Oh, oh, oh. In the darkest hour, in the middle of the raging sea, when I'm in the battle, Lord, you are with me. In the darkest hour, in the middle of the raging sea, when I'm in the battle, Lord, you are with me. Your light is shining, you make the darkness flee. You are my rescue, Lord, you are with me.